All right. Welcome back to another episode of the Built to Grow podcast. I'm going to be your host today, Randy Angston, joined today with Mr. Zach Columbia.
Yo, welcome back.
Hey, good to see you. Good to see you. All right, guys. So for today, we're on the topic. We're going to have a little podcast inception. We're going to have a podcast about podcasts.
The podcast.
Yeah. Zach and the team here at Legacy have a podcast for their seat, for Zach as the director here, and then their coaching team. They have their podcast. Is it still called Healthy Living Scottsdale?
Healthy Living Scottsdale.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. So why don't we dive in for today? We want to have the conversation about why it may be appropriate and probably advantageous for you as a gym to have either your coaching team or yourself, depending on your involvement in the business, but to have a podcast for your location as well. Zach, do you want to just kind of take it from maybe just like the 10,000 foot view as to like, topics, things that you guys discuss, and then we'll get into some of the benefits of what the podcast does for business.
So, there's a never ending, pool of topics for us to talk about. And we basically get together on Mondays. We have our team meeting, and we decide what we're going to talk about the next week. Okay. So we're always 1 week ahead in determining a topic, and it's usually things that are relevant to our clients, questions that our clients are asking us, that are coming up, any challenges or problems we are kind of foreseeing, or common trends. And so as a team, we just get together and say, okay, next week we're going to talk about cholesterol. We're going to do a topic about cholesterol. We're going to do one about VO2 max, or we're going to do one about staying fit over the holidays. Like, there's this just never ending pool of things that are coming up with our clients. And so that's kind of how we decide, here's what we're going to talk about.
Sure.
And if we, notice that there's some sort of message that we've been trying to get across to our clients, and we're just, still struggling to get them to understand a particular thing, then we're like, hey, let's talk about that on the podcast.
There you go. So, give yourself the ability to kind of speak a little bit deeper. Do you guys share this with your current client base and things like that?
Like as far as who's listening to it? Yeah. So, we called it the Healthy Living Scottsdale podcast by design, in order to just broaden our reach.
Sure.
So instead of it being like the Legacy personal training podcast, it's local. So Scottsdale is in there, Healthy Living Scottsdale. And so it's the Healthy Living Scottsdale powered by Legacy personal training. Before we changed our name as Pulse Fitness. And so the whole idea is, hey, we create this podcast, and then it's obviously, for anybody that is in our locale, they're searching, they're looking for anything healthy living, fitness in Scottsdale, they find a podcast that's all about that. And then, lo and behold, it's by this team of personal trainers in this facility that's right down the street from me.
There you go.
So there's this kind of SEO component to it.
Absolutely. Well. Yeah. Right. It's exposure, local exposure. Obviously, you said a perfect phrase before we got started. You said 5 mile famous, right? Why don't you define that for our listeners a little bit?
Yeah.
And why?
Well, we want to be the experts for everyone that's within a 5 mile radius of us. Right. Perfect. So there's gyms all over surrounded by us. I know there's lots of listeners. They probably, are in a smaller town, and they're 1 or 2 gyms. For us, there's probably like 1 or 2 gyms within a mile.
Yeah. I think we figured out like 25 within 5 or something.
Yeah. And so there's gyms all over the place. Do they have a podcast? Do they look like the experts, or do we look like the experts? And so part of it is elevating ourselves and saying, hey, we're 5 mile famous. We're the go-to authority in this area for all things health and fitness. And so that's the image and the message that we're trying to portray to our market. And then also, at the same time, continuing to provide education for our clients. If you think about, your average client, they're coming to you for fitness, which means that the algorithm that's out there, it's picking up, the fact that they're working out, that they're interested in fitness things. They're probably, looking at logging their food and researching health and fitness and supplements and all those things. So the algorithm's picking up and they're going to hit them with ads for all kinds of different things, and topics and content and all of that. And as anybody in the fitness industry knows, they're going to be bombarded with content about everything health and fitness.
Sure.
And so part of the reason why we also wanted to start a podcast is, hey, we want to control as much of the message that our clients are getting as possible. We don't, so frustrating when somebody sees whatever, like some banded booty exercise on Instagram, and then they come in and they're like, why don't we do this exercise? You guys suck. They're doing this, and look at this girl's butt. Look how good it looks. And it's like, all right, well, yeah. And then you're up against that. And so one of the things that we try to do is, hey, we're the authority in this area. We've got the podcast. We control some of the messaging. And so our clients are constantly seeing clips of our podcast and listening to the whole thing. And then they can come to us versus going somewhere else or being a squirrel and easily distracted by some other,
shiny
post.
ball.
Yes, exactly.
Which is great. And one of the things, obviously we could speak about, if you listening, you understand the value that can be shared over 15, 20 minutes in a podcast. You're listening to a podcast for the purpose of consuming education, value, things like that. But from the other end of this, to be able to deliver that in a short, concise manner, podcasts are one of the few places where you can capture somebody's, attention for that kind of time span and deliver something of value. And so I love that for your, current client base, for the local resident experts. But as we were talking through, it goes beyond just the new business, the resident expert component. You had some kind of realizations that it has some benefits to not only the exterior, outside the four walls for what it does for the business, but also within the business. Why don't we dive into that a little bit?
Yeah. So, obviously content is content. So sure. we create the podcast, and we, not only do we have the full video and audio of it and recording, but we also chop those up. We post them on social media. We even sometimes use them for ads. Like, it's a really efficient use of our time, because we can get in a podcast studio, we can record a 15-minute podcast, and then we can repurpose that. And it has multiple, channels that we can deliver that through. That's kind of obvious, I think, for everybody. It's like, okay, well, you get the podcast, that makes sense. You're creating the content. What is not so obvious is what it does for our team internally.
Okay.
And in terms of priority, what it does for our team internally is much more important than what it does externally. And, whether anybody listened to our podcast or didn't listen to it, I don't really care. And so that's interesting, right? And here's why. So, coach burnout is a real thing.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. And our coaches are coming in, and, they get here at 4:45 in the morning. They train clients from 5 a.m. to 12 p.m. back to back to back to back. They've got 4, 5, 6 people they're working with every single hour, day in and day out. And that can get really, I guess, just repetitive, mundane. Sure. And it can get to a point where you kind of, as a coach, forget why you're in this industry. They're in this industry to help people. They're in this industry to make an impact in people's lives. And you can kind of lose sight of that somewhat when you're just delivering training session after training session and working with people that are canceling their memberships and all that. And so one thing that the podcast does is it allows the coach to step away from the training floor and then project this message and actually be a coach. They get to teach, they get to educate, they get to feel like they're making a bigger impact than just running training sessions.
There you go.
Training sessions have to happen. That's the reality of the business. So the podcast creates, I think, like a little bit of a balance between, hey, I'm running cattle through this system to feeling like that, sometimes to, no, I'm coaching and I'm getting to really, deliver a message that's bigger than just working with people on the training floor.
Let's expand on that a little bit. When it comes to topics, do you feel like that's I'm sure it's kind of like a loaded question. I feel like the answer is going to be yes, and we're going to get into it. But I feel like it's also one of those areas where like continued education comes into play, right?
Oh, it's huge.
You know what I mean? So it's not just, it's not just, hey, this is what we do. This is what I do every day. Let me go talk about this necessarily, right? They're not talking about their training experience on the floor every day. They're bringing different, like you said, you guys are planning ahead on what the topics are going to be. How does that break down into like their continued education and their continued, development within the coaching role?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And it's another kind of internal thing that is a benefit of having a podcast. Nobody wants to sound like an idiot on a podcast. And so it's one of the ways that we get our team to continue to develop themselves and learn, because we'll come up with a topic like I threw out cholesterol. We did a podcast on cholesterol. It's like, hey, everybody, go research cholesterol. Yeah. And so you're prepared for this, prepared for the podcast. So then when we sit down, you understand it, you have, talking points and we can all talk around that topic intelligently. And so it's really kind of an opportunity for continuing education, but we put that on the coaches, right? So I could control the narrative or the topics a little bit more than I do, but I kind of leave it up to the team. Sure. We get in the meeting and I'm like, okay, what's going on in the gym? What do you guys think is relevant? What should we talk about? And so, as a team, we just wrapped up a two-part series on menopause. And we actually are doing the third episode today. We did 2 parts and then the team was like, hey, let's do another one of these.
There you go.
And so that's something that's relevant for our clients, because we've got a lot of people, like our main demographic is 40 plus, and we got a lot of women, female clients that are going through this and they're struggling with it. So, hey guys, how do we help our clients? How do we, do a better job of helping our clients, reassure them that we're competent in dealing with this, we understand what they're going through, and we have a strategy to combat that, right, and overcome those challenges. So that's a piece of it, like the continuing education component for sure. The other kind of key component internally is it feels like a career versus a job, versus I'm a trainer. When you have a podcast, when we're interviewing and, we're putting out our job posting and I'm talking around this, you can think about the people that are in this industry. They're our coaches, like they, for the most part, have that desire and that passion to have this voice, to make an impact, to really help people. And we give them that platform. Yeah. And so it appeals to the career-oriented coach, the same way that for our clients, our competitors don't have a podcast. They're not the authority. Our competitors don't have a podcast to give that platform and that opportunity to the coaches on their team.
There you go.
And so that's really just an added benefit. Hey, you come work for us, you're going to be on the podcast. And that feels cool, right? I mean, it looks good on a resume. Like that's something that you can be proud of. And it's a little bit more, if I were hiring and I'm looking at applications from coaches, if I have a trainer that was just a trainer and I have a trainer that was on a podcast and a trainer, that's going to stand out to me, right? It's going to be a clear differentiator. Yeah. And so for our team, that's also part of it is, hey, there's this career component. And so it helps on multiple levels. And from an internal standpoint, those are more important to me than the external, the public facing side.
Sure. It's not just about the exposure, not just about the resident expert feel and things like that. Because, I mean, again, we talk about repurposing content. You've got a handful of different ways, poles in the water, if you may, right?
Yeah.
Email lists, and you're continually doing that to some degry. What is the gap? What is gain there? Who knows? You know what I mean? Sometimes. But to have and feel what it's doing internally, I mean, I think it's got massive benefit. I mean, we just obviously uncovered some of those, but I'm thinking to myself too, you know, if I'm a candidate and I'm applying for a gym, that is a big differentiator.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And to give some, you know, context to that, we know that the average trainer now enters and leaves the industry within 12 months.
Yeah.
You know, if you've got an opportunity like that in front of you, it's a lot more than just the repetitive day-to-day training of a client. So I could definitely see that being a big draw. Is there anything else that you think, you know, are either recognized or unrecognized gains as far as having the team, you know, in the seat?
Oh, well, I would say that it's really good from a team dynamic, team culture standpoint, right? Because we have to come together and work together to kind of produce this, right? So, so there's that element that's kind of layered in there. And to our clients, one thing, so tactics, we'll go through a couple tactics. Like, obviously we have the podcast studio because we have this podcast, the Built to Grow one. And so we just double dip on this, right? So for somebody that doesn't have a podcast studio, that's a gym, you know, you don't have to be super fancy with it. I mean, just go and take some action and create it, right? You probably have a little office that you could, you know, make this work in. We do a podcast once a week. So, you know, we have our team meetings on Monday. We record podcasts on Tuesday. And, you know, we're basically a week ahead and we say, okay, next week, what are we going to talk about? And then we come up with the topic, the team researches it. And then we're ready to talk about it. And we just do a rotation with our team because we have 3 coaches on the podcast. There's 4 coaches and myself. So we just do a little rotation, you know, and it's nice because I don't have to create all of the content that we produce myself. I have a team that's there. We're creating the podcasts and, you know, there's that. There's also this accessibility component. So we talked about the standard before, on the Built to Grow podcast. The standard, we have the standard experience, the standard session, the standard coach. The standard experience, is a punch list of 10 things that we feel like everybody should experience coming into our business, working with our coaching staff. And number 10 on the list is accessibility. It's the last one. And so, accessibility could be thought of as, hey, how accessible is your team? You know, if I come into the gym, can I get a hold of somebody? Can I talk to somebody about something? But the podcast also is a way for us to open that door. Because if you listen to a podcast, you feel as though you kind of know the person. You get to know the person in a different way, different light than you would in the like from that environment than on the training floor.
Absolutely.
And so when our clients listen to our podcast, they're getting to see the coach from a different angle, and that coach feels more accessible to them. And so that's also one of the components of it. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of it. I mean, it's basically multi-layered. There's numerous benefits to it. There's really no downside to it.
I was going to ask that because I mean, there's pros and cons to typically everything, right?
Yeah,
like
I don't know that there's a con, you know, outside of the fact that, you know, in order to deliver on this, I think you have to have the right framework in terms of your schedule, right? So we record these at noon, and the way our coaches' schedules are designed is like we've got our morning crew and then our afternoon crew, and we overlap at noon. So Mondays we have our team meeting, Tuesdays we record our podcast, Thursday we do coach to coach, Friday we do a team workout. And so it's built into our schedule where we already have this time, the whole team's here and we can execute on it. You know, if you don't have that where it's like, oh, I got this part-time coach here, this part-time coach here, this part-time coach here, and you can't coordinate an hour to get together, it's going to be really, really hard for you, you know, to deliver. You know, and as an owner, you know, I don't know if you're sitting in the seat of like, hey, I'm the owner, but I'm trying to get out of the role of being in the business, in delivery and running day-to-day operations, I don't know. Do you want to start a podcast and add that to your plate and then at some point try to step away from it and give it to your team and turn it over to a director? Because Tim's never been on our podcast for Healthy Living Scottsdale. It's never once, and there are times I'm on most of the episodes, but there are times where the team's just on there by themselves. And so, that's something to consider too, is like, hey, do I want to have my team spearhead this, or do I want to be a part of it and take control of it and then kind of mix the coaches in?
Well, yeah. And I love that idea too. I mean, my belief with every business owner that we work with is that you shouldn't be building yourselves into delivery ever. Right.
Yeah.
And so, if you're going to have one for your team, the business itself, I would absolutely prefer if they put their director in charge of it, or just even in the seat to manage, run it. You know what I mean? Maybe they're not the face of it. Maybe they're not on every episode, but you've kind of knighted them. Like, this is their responsibility. This is, under your umbrella. And, you're in charge of bringing to the table what you feel this should look like, right? Combination of the team, who's in charge, who's doing it, that type of thing. But the delegation component, I think, is even, the other half of the value that comes to the table, because this doesn't necessarily need to be another thing the owner of a business does. You can absolutely do this with a coaching team, your director, the staff that you have employed. They can carry this torch. And it might be even more appropriate for them, right? I think, if you're talking proximity to your clients, if you're talking, if you want to have relevant communication over the things that are happening, the things that are being discussed, the challenges that your clients are facing, who knows it better than the people that are talking to them the most, right?
Exactly.
So,
yeah. One more thing, we'll wrap, but I forgot to mention this. Every single episode, we open with a client of the week.
Okay.
So we give a shout out to a client of the week, and it's just, hey, they've been working really hard. We love them. Here's a couple of, great things about this person. And then the coaches go and tell the client, hey, you are client of the week this week. And so that's how we create a lot of engagement on our podcast from our current clients and get them to listen to it, is because they're client of the week. So there's also this subtle retention component as well. Like, that's a dopamine hit for a client. Hey, that feels really good. I was client of the week on the podcast. They recognized me publicly. It's whether we have 1,000 people to listen to our podcast that aren't members of our gym or not, that still feels really good. And the perception from the client is like, hey, they got this podcast and they announced that, they recognized me, and that feels really good. And this is my team. And it just anchors the person to us a little bit more.
And I'm sure there's even a referral component to it, right? They're featured on something, they share it with a couple friends, family, something like that. Oh, listen, my gym gave me a shout out on this. And all of a sudden you've got other active listeners now engaged in a podcast that they had no intention of ever seeking out themselves, but because somebody they knew was featured.
Totally.
Now they're listening and stuff. So a lot of, we went over a lot of positive aspects to having the podcast. Obviously we both feel, Built to Grow's, we've got damn close to 600 episodes. So I don't think we're not really stuck on any cons, but you listening, consider it for yourself. Is this something that you feel you can bring to the table, or your team can bring to the table? Zach shared, a number of solid benefits. One of the things that I will say is, if you are interested in launching a podcast, we do work with a team for distribution. I know that they do have some assets when it comes to equipment, when it comes to just how to make this easier. If you guys want to reach out to us, just shoot us an email. All that stuff's in the show notes. We can help you kind of get the ball rolling. We have had a number of clients that have started theirs and got those off the ground. So we'd love to help if that is something that you are interested in. Just shoot us an email and we'll go from there. But I think for this one, that's everything that we have for today. We'll see you on the next episode of the Built to Grow podcast.
All right. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Built to Grow podcast. If you want more help growing your business, join our free Facebook group, Profit Accelerator, helping training gyms grow to $30,000 a month and beyond. We'd love to see you there. Go check out the show notes for the link and keep building something great. And we'll see you in the next episode.